Welcome to the Place Retreats podcast. I'm your host, psychotherapist Jean-Claude Chalmet, and every week I'm joined by comedian Amy Cooper and psychotherapy student Louise Daniels for often fun, always insightful discussions exploring the intricate landscapes of the mind and the heart, the complexities of the human experience. Today, we will be discussing what happens when things don't go according to plan and how we can cope with disappointment when life inevitably throws the odd curveball. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Yes, I think this is going to be a really interesting one. I feel like I'm failing on every, the Trivial Pursuit cheese block. You know, you get the little segments of your life. I'm dropping every plate. And it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to kind of have that resilience and keep going when things don't go according to plan. So
it's very interesting, Amy, that you say that, because rejection and failure are actually universal human experiences. You know?
Absolutely, yeah.
They absolutely remain amongst the most challenging emotions to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, why is it that it's so painful? And I don't know if it's like a triggering thing. Who knows if it's kind of harping back to like every time you messed up as a child, if that wasn't treated compassionately, does it sort of re-trigger that? Or something's happening in the brain? Will you tell us exactly what is happening there?
Whether you're denied a job application or a relationship ending, which of course is a big one, or a project falling short, what is so interesting, or a dream that is deferred, for instance. The sting of that rejection and the weight of that failure, can feel so personal and so overwhelming for a lot of people. And I think it has a lot to do because we are not trained how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And very often when we are a child, when we have failed, you have to try harder and, look what it, and your scorecard or your report card shows this. Oh, how could you do that? So we are very... education, for instance, is a total reward system. And so every time that we don't make the mark, we are being shamed and blamed and made to feel guilty. And it is learning how to respond to these experiences that can profoundly shape our mental well-being, our mental health, our personal growth, and our overall well-being. So we need to learn, I think, reframe rejection. And see failure as opportunities for growth, for change, fostering resilience, and prioritizing our mental well-being and wellness, our mental wellness. And I think what we have to be very careful with is that, how we've been taught is not necessarily the best way to deal with rejection and failure. And we need to relearn, or we need to learn and engineer ourselves to see it in a very different light. And those painful moments, we could use them as stepping stones towards a more fulfilling life.
And I guess that failure, by its very nature, I think that's how you learn, isn't it? Through failure, and we all know that. And when I think about when I've messed something up. Yeah. Well, when I think about when I've messed something up, I will then look at that thing. If I've done something and someone goes, "Well done, you did that brilliantly," that's it. I don't learn anything from that. Yeah. That's something that I was already able to do, clearly, because I've done it, and then I don't look into it in any way. But if somebody says to me, "Oh, you didn't pass this, whatever it was," or this is not quite right. This isn't quite right.
Yeah.
Then I give it time and I look at it, but I will feel. But I won't like that because I want to pass everything all the time, like with top marks.
Which is, of course, unreasonable to expect of ourselves. And so if we go a little deeper in the understanding rejection and failure, it's the experience of being either excluded, dismissed, turned away, and whilst that gives us this failure, if we can call it that way, is the inability to meet a desired goal or expectation, for sure. But then we have to ask ourselves, okay, this triggers an emotional response of sadness, of shame, of blame, of self-doubt, and even anger. And so when we know that about ourselves, I think, is that us as a personality, or is it actually these feelings are rooted in evolutionary biology? How we've been brought up. Our brains are wired, to seek acceptance and success, because historically these were essential for survival.
Yeah, so I guess there's a threat to survival, isn't there? There is a threat to your survival, whether it's your livelihood or your companionship. So you don't want to be alone.
No,
you don't
we are herd
want to be hungry,
and we don't want to be expelled, or we don't want to be rejected.
Yeah,
because those were surefire things that would, mean most probably our demise. So,
and yet, actually, if we are honest about our, how we feel, like allow ourselves to be seen as maybe vulnerable, which some people might call that being weak, or that isn't that something that helps like human relationships so much more than somebody just sort of sitting there looking like they've got it all
Louise,
together.
it's very interesting that you bring up vulnerability, because, as you know, I see a lot of men in my practice and in the retreat, and men would rather be dead than being seen vulnerable, because vulnerability for them usually means weakness. But it's very interesting. If you teach them about vulnerability, it's actually a strength.
Yeah, it really is. And it's quite a brave thing to just be completely honest with people about, that takes a lot of strength and braveness, really.
Absolutely. And it's wonderful to be able to teach men about vulnerability and what it means, and how attractive you become as a person to be able, not to be in the victim role or the pity party, but just say, look, those are my limits. I do not know this. I can't do this. That's just how it is. And accepting this, especially for men, accepting that, is really a very big feat to overcome. And we have to remember that in modern times, I don't think that rejection and failure are rarely life-threatening. But through the evolutionary biology, we are still, we haven't overcome that. And do we actually teach in schools young kids about resilience and failure and rejection? I don't think we do, even today.
No.
It's really hard to kind of synthetically create that. How do you kind of obviously for children, we're so protective about their mental health. We almost don't. We're frightened to kind of put them in a situation where they might fail. So there is a lot of kind of, like for example, like the 11 plus is coming up in this area, which I'm sure you'll remember, Louise, from when you lived in Kent, and it's a whole thing, like, the grammar school system.
Right, so can I just dive in there and say to me is a classic example of parents really fucking up for their children. And I've heard so many like mums like, oh well, little Johnny wants to do it, he's desperate to do it. Bullshit, is he? If he's
because you've used an iPad as a carrot,
don't put him through it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's and I've heard it from really good friends of mine, and I'm just like, no, you want him to do it. You want him to be at the grammar school, and all that comes with that. And then we're worrying about. Well,
about the stress once they get into that environment,
and that you've got a child who's scraped in, and then they're bottom of the class and trying to catch up all the time and feeling like a failure all the time. And quite frankly, if you've got parents who have put them through that system, then they're not going to be able to support them when they feel like a failure. They're going to they're not up to the job, in my opinion. And also, the teachers in that school, the whole ethos is, you've got to be clever system. And you've got to
it's the reward system.
Reward system. So
and for as long as we will not involve emotion-led teaching and growing in the classroom, we will just perpetuate this system where if you are top of the class, you're amazing, and if you're bottom of the class, you're terrible.
Yeah,
and you're stupid. And
certainly in Tunbridge Wells, that is. I would say I can't think of any parents really that I knew that were like, if their child, I think much easier if you had a child that you knew wasn't going to pass the 11 plus. So, then that's an easy decision to make. But if you've got a child that might scrape through.
There's like a borderline thing, isn't there? And you know what, just as I was saying before, like, Dan and I can say to our kids as much as we want. Like, back in our day, we weren't consulted on every family decision. We were left outside in the working men's club car park with a packet of crisps. Like now they're at the center of our world. We pour over every emotion and every decision. But how do we kind of make a simulation of that? And so my son, he is like a borderline case of whether he would pass the 11 plus or not. But I think that actually this could be an opportunity to sort of like, well, let's do it. Obviously, we are not pressure parents at all. If anything, we're kind of like the other way. But actually, there is a thing of like, this could be a useful learning opportunity. This could be a useful kind of like, well, that's what that would feel like. To possibly fail that. But then I'm kind of like, oh no, is that really irresponsible? And actually on the day I might just say, no, don't do it. I want to protect you from that because it's hard.
But you see, you don't seek validation of your parenting through your child's school results.
No, absolutely not. But I'm just thinking about little life opportunity, little windows that we have to sort of try something. If it doesn't work, there's an opportunity to have a conversation about failure.
I would say, be honest with yourself. That's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because you want him to pass the 11 plus and go to a grammar school.
Oh no, Louise, honestly, I think I am like because I know the sort of parents that you're talking about, and for me, I absolutely do not want him to even be within a couple of points of getting in, because that is too skin of the teeth for me. And also for me, I've got like a socialist thing where I'm kind of like, no, that grammar school is for kids who are kind of like fucking bright, excuse my French, but maybe there is just not the resources around them, or that's what that those grammar schools are for, so that they can go and sort of flourish, and rather than middle class kids that have been crowbarred and tutored to the eyeballs to get in there. But you're right. I mean, I think it's happening in a few different counties, and maybe in America there must be, around the world there must be these. It's tests. It's competitive. There is a bit of a competitive parenting thing there. But are we setting them up for when they go for that job? And definitely since COVID, I've got a few friends whose kids are now in the workplace or desperately trying to get into the workplace, young adults, and it's hard out there. It's really hard.
It is, but it has been hard for a long time. But the whole point that we are trying to make is, what does rejection and failure mean? How does it impact on our mental health? And how can we make it better? How can we become more resilient?
Yeah. I mean, I think you said at the beginning, JC, that did you say something about like almost like exposure therapy? You almost need to experience rejection a few times early on to be able to have that bandwidth and resilience to be able to deal with it.
Absolutely. And, I think, we all know that rejection and failure can take a toll on mental health, particularly if they are internalized as personal shortcomings. And I think this is where, as parents, I think there are many times as parents that we see our child, has failed or, was rejected for a play group or, at a swimming pool or whatever. And it's about talking to them and explaining to them and having them understand, from an early age that it's part of life. but very many times parents will blame their children for not being accepted or for being expelled or for having this or that or the other. And so it's our whole mental attitude that we are just repeating the pattern, and saying to a child, oh, well, it happened to me, you're going to be okay, is not enough in today's world. You really need to understand that, what is the impact on mental health of rejection and failure? Well, one, it's definitely lower self-esteem. If you have repeated rejection or failure, it can definitely lead to feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt, for sure. And that starts in childhood already. Later it can be, as a young adolescent, it can lead to anxiety and depression. The fear of a future rejection already fills people with the fear of being rejected, and it's sort of the snowball effect. And it can create a cycle of avoidance, rumination, exacerbating mental health challenges. So, and then for some kids, it might, or young adults, it might lead into perfectionism. So I'm going to set myself unrealistically high goals, high standards, and that, as we see very often in young adults, can lead to burnout and chronic stress. And then, of course, the worst one in today's social media is isolation. That the shame associated with failure, can cause people to withdraw from social connections, and that will, of course, have a further impact on their emotional well-being. And then they will be scrolling on social media to support the view of themselves and be looking at things that they are not. And so perpetuating the chronic feelings of emptiness, chronic feelings of what they are not and where they have failed. And we must remember that these outcomes are not inevitable. We are able, with the right mindset, with tools, rejection and failure, we can just learn to process in much more healthier ways. And that will inevitably lead to better resilience and, personal growth.
Yeah. Have you guys ever had any rejections that kind of stick out, whether they were personal or professional, that still kind of sting a bit when you think of them? I mean, for me, it's my story that I told when we did the ghosting episode. Go back to the ghosting episode, where I literally got invited down to London as an 18-year-old for New Year's Eve, and it was 10 o'clock on New Year's Eve in 1999 or 2000. No, it wasn't the Millennium one, but that's still that rejection that I'm so mortified when I think of it. I can still recall that feeling of but now, I guess, with a bit of distance, you can, I think, oh God, I was so young and I think that when I think back to that scar, of that emotional kind of scar, I'm kind of I kind of needed that to, I guess what we're talking about here, you almost need to toughen that layer.
And also there's a difference between failure in relationships or people, excluding you and rejecting you, and then there's failing in, I don't know, something academic or
I mean, for me, rejection started at a very early age because my birth mother never wanted me and never stopped saying it every single day, and so it certainly destroyed me in early life. And rejection and failure still sting today. I mean, of course, I have learned to deal with them, but it can still sting pretty badly, and I think that for me, each time it's a practice in building resilience. And I read this wonderful little quote, especially for our listeners that might be listening and that have lived through a lifetime of abuse. I think one of the most beautiful things I ever read is, people mean well, but I wish they would stop telling me that my traumas made me who I am today. My resilience did that. I won't ever credit who and what tried to break me. all credit belongs to my ability to remove pieces that never should have been and finding ways to rebuild.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So it's not actually the trauma that builds the resilience. It's our sort of what we do after that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And for instance, in my case, it wasn't my fault that my mother was a narcissistic psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but as a young child, you don't know that.
No.
And so, I never thought that I was even intelligent or capable or, and it took a very long time. I can say that. I remember my business partner when I was 37 and we were driving in Greece, and I looked at him and I asked him, do you think I'm intelligent? And I was 37.
Wow.
Yeah. And yet we had done amazing, successful stories in what we had achieved. And yet it all felt very much like I was an imposter. And that's
you were saying imposter syndrome.
You were seeking that
validation.
Validation, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that was the big turning point in my life. And that's actually when I retrained to become a psychotherapist.
Did you see a psychotherapist yourself and see the benefit of, and that's how that came about?
Yes, I mean, I did two sets of therapy. One was from 28 till 32, where I saw a therapist 2 or 3 hours a week individually, and 6 hours of group therapy for 4.5 years. And then I did a second set of therapy from 37 to 40 when I was training.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, I think that, what I have learned, and this is what I wrote down to talk about, strategies for coping with rejection and failure. So I think what I would say is one of the most important things is to acknowledge and validate your emotions, whatever they are. So it's the first step, I would say, is that, to deal with rejection and failure is to allow yourself whatever it is that you're feeling. Because suppressing those feelings or denying those feelings will only make it worse and prolong their impact. So my advice would be practice self-compassion by acknowledging that it's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to feel disappointed. It's okay to feel frustrated. But take a piece of paper, write down how you feel. Talk to a very good friend. Check whether your feelings are, misguided or whether they are appropriate to what has been happening. Or you can seek even therapy, and it can help you to process those emotions in a healthy way. Are they appropriate to the situation that I'm dealing with? Or am I, taking situations of the past, bringing them into this rather insignificant thing that has happened, and it's blown out of proportion? Because it's very possible that this small rejection or this small failure taps into a well that is already pre-existing inside me. And then everything comes up and makes that particular thing, here I go again. It's again this, or, I failed again, or I've been rejected again. So that is very important to me, that, be aware that you might be doing that. And actually what is happening in that moment to you is only 5% or 10% of what is the feelings that are associated, because whatever the situation is has made you dive into that well that was already pre-existing and doesn't belong to what has happened in that moment to you. So that's the number one. The number two, and I became very good at it, was reframing the narrative. I didn't know it was called that way. It was only after I trained as a psychotherapist that I learned it was reframing the narrative. But I had to learn to see that rejection and failure were not the end points of my life or my career or my friendships or my love life. It was just part of a larger journey that I was on. And was I going to choose to stop that in my tracks, or was that going to help me becoming better and bigger and more understanding and create more resilience within myself? And I think that, if we can learn to reframe these experiences as opportunities for learning, how to become a bigger and better person, it can shift your perspective totally. So the ways that I would advise people is that, one, ask yourself, what can I learn from this experience? Two, how can I use this setback to improve myself or my approach to things? And three, what strengths did I actually demonstrate in the process? So by shifting the focus on growth rather than defeat, you can really cultivate a mindset of resilience.
Yeah.
Number three, one of the most important things, you have to separate your worth from the outcome.
Yeah, it's not personal, is it? It's not personal.
It's so important.
Yeah.
It's easy to equate rejection or failure with personal inadequacy.
Yeah.
It is not true. But it is a cognitive distortion.
I just saw Louise's face go, well, sometimes I'm always thinking when we're having these discussions about like the myriad of scenarios, and I guess if you've got, but this kind of goes back to what you were saying before, if you've got somebody who is behaving in a certain way that then gets them rejected, then there's something that needs to be looked at there. But I guess without the help,
changed. It can be changed.
But you have to have that self-awareness, I guess.
But
don't you?
Read. There's a lot of help available. Remind yourself that your worth is not determined by external validation or success. And we have learned this as a child in school as a reward system. And we need to disengage from that, and we need to become emotion-led human beings where we can accept
But that's
ourselves.
not going to happen, is it? Because it doesn't matter what we're doing at home. When children go to school, that's like that is such a big influence, and
it
then
is,
also
Louise, but
all of their
that
friends
doesn't mean that we can't deprogram ourselves.
No. So, but what about our children?
You are inherently valuable, regardless of the outcome.
Well,
so affirmations, mindfulness practices, and therapy can help reinforce that belief. And when we are at a certain age, we can actually look after ourselves. I mean, my whole attitude in therapy is, I can tell you, 95% of the time, it's teaching adults how to become good parents, the adult version of them today, to become a good parent to that frightened, anxiety-ridden, shy inner child that is still sitting in them. And that journey of helping people understand that they can actually become, with the adult version of themselves, an extremely good parent to that inner child and build that relationship with themselves is so rewarding, and build so much resilience and self-love and self-actualization and self-soothing and self-regulation, because all these experiences in childhood help us to be dysregulated. And I think that's very...
Maybe there's a thing where we toggle between the systems that are in place, school, college, university, jobs, where, of course, if you're good at your job, you're going to get having promotion talks, aren't you? Like that. So we have to be, I guess, realistic about that. Is the systems, the school is kind of training.
Absolutely, but is that
the sausage
therefore
factory, isn't it?
Yeah, is that therefore the only way? Is that therefore the correct way? Is that therefore the only valuable way? And I think that's where, when you talked earlier, Amy, is that you have that responsibility as a parent to show the alternative, so that our kids are aware that other things exist.
Well, there is an alternative, and that we can toggle between, almost be able to go,
Absolutely.
now I know what I need to do, I'm socialized enough to know that I need to do this, but actually maybe melding marrying and melting those two ethoses gives us
Absolutely.
that whole experience. Yeah,
absolutely. And what I see very often is that people don't know how to set realistic expectations. Perfectionism, this sets up very often for disappointment. And so instead of striving for that perfect 10 or 9 or that perfect result or that A plus, I think that we should strive for progress and effort. And we need to teach young adults and children, and even us ourselves as adults, that setbacks are a natural part of any endeavor. And they do not diminish your capabilities, because you can walk into an exam and absolutely flunk it, and you could walk into the same exam a month later, ace it.
So going back to what you were saying about like reframing that narrative is really one of the most important things that I guess we can do for our children, acknowledging feelings, and then
and we need to. The other thing that I would say is extremely important is to build a support system. Surround yourself with people who uplift and encourage you, even with your children. As parents, you have a certain influence of who your children are seeing and are surrounded by. And you, as the parent, you have a sort of innate detectometer, I would say, to see the children that are bullying, or the children that are can be nasty, or children that can put other children down. And you can sort in. And of course, very often our children will go for people like that, because they're different and they want to explore. But we have to be very attentive, and we have to be very vigilant whom our children are seeing, because otherwise it's sort of a perpetuating game. And we can teach our children to be emotion led, and be very careful of how they process their emotions. And we are actually the people that are responsible for that, and teach them how, as young adults, even when they move away from us and we become sort of surplus to requirement, where their validation group becomes their peer group rather than their parents, and we have a certain responsibility in that, and I think that they need to know that they have empathetic listeners, who can provide comfort and perspective, and even send your child, if necessary, to get support from a therapist or a counselor, if they are navigating very complex emotions, and teaching them how to develop coping strategies.
Yeah.
For me, as a parent, it was always important to support my children to the hilt. And I think I've told this story before, when I said to my kids the thing that, tell your children that they're the most beautiful, the most wonderful, the most amazing, the most gorgeous, the most clever people in the world, for what they hear is what they will believe. And I remember my youngest one sending a thing, "Oh, is that so?" Quick as a flash, and I said, "Well, it worked on you." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there was no answer to that one. But it's about how do we, even if we didn't receive it ourselves, we have the capacity to teach it to the people that surround us. Because rejection and failure is emotionally draining. So it's essential, that we prioritize self-care. Even when you have experienced rejection or failure, engage in activities that nourish your mind, that your body, your spirit, exercise, meditation, creative expression, spending time in nature, work on that vagal tone, that is so important, so that your vagus nerve is not activated and you do the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn reaction. These are things that we can learn. There's so much available on YouTube, on literature, on self-help books. Educate yourself, grow, evolve, make yourself stronger, make yourself the most beautiful person that you can be, whatever that is. But feel that you are helping yourself, growing yourself, evolving from where you are. You are capable inherently. Taking care of yourself reinforces your ability to cope with challenges. And then last but not least, take action. yes, it is important to process your emotions. But I think one of the biggest challenges is avoid getting stuck in a cycle of rumination. That is
Yeah.
the absolute killer.
Yeah, I'm a ruminator. Yeah, defo. Yeah.
Once you've reflected on the experience,
move on.
Identify what can you do. How can you actionable action or steps that you can take to move forward? What can I actually do? And do it. It might be revising your goals,
Louise looks
seeking
exhausted
feedback,
just at the thought
or
of that.
try a new approach, because trying the same thing for a situation and expecting a different outcome ain't gonna work.
No.
Be innovative. We are all blessed with a brain, with the capacity to read, to hear, to listen, to understand, to talk, to experience. It's there. Allow yourself to grow. And through that, you will actually, increase your resilience. So what is resilience? If we look at it in a sort of analytical form, it's the ability to bounce back from adversity. That is what resilience is. So it's a key factor in dealing with rejection and failure.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that is innate to any of us, but it's actually a skill that can be developed over time. And I think this is so important. People say, oh, well, I don't have it. Well, you can learn it. You can develop that skill, by cultivating a growth mindset, practicing self-compassion, maintain a sense of purpose, developing problem-solving skills. I mean, there are thousands of books on this that you can read, and you can apply bits of this and there, fostering strong social connections so that you have people that are actually standing next to you, helping you see things differently. And I think there's a misperception that resilience is not, or it doesn't mean avoiding pain or pretending everything is fine. It's actually the opposite. It's about facing challenges head on, learning from them and emerging stronger and moving on and looking back at yourself and go, you know what? I actually got through that. God, that was tough. God, that was painful. God, that was difficult. But here I am.
Yeah. I think it's so hard, isn't it, when you're in that you're in a bit of a doom loop, and that victim mentality and that woe is me.
You know what I always say, Amy? When people are in a doom loop, I say, think of J.K. Rowling. How many times was her book rejected? By how many publishing houses?
Yeah. You hear a lot about stories of people like actors who were just rejected, and people who create people that we, who then went on to succeed. But I think that it almost becomes then your identity of I guess maybe somebody who is not lucky in love, or is maybe rejected from, finding it difficult to keep a hold of a job or something. And then it becomes kind of like, that then becomes your sort of personality. I think we've said it before, haven't we? Misery loves company. So you tend to get more attention that way.
Stop there, Amy. So I tell people, my motto in life is all is well and everything is as it should be.
As in, what's happening right now is how it should be, even if that is shit.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm exactly where I should be. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then it's up to me, how do I get out of this? It's rejection and failure are not the end, but I can see them as the beginning of something better and greater. For me, on a personal level, I have to say navigating rejection and failure is what has taught me the most. And you said it in the beginning, Louise. When we are uncomfortable with ourselves, we are seeking to get out of it. We become creative, innovative. We are looking all the time because we don't like that uncomfortable feeling. We don't like sitting with it. So we actually apply ourselves, because nobody wants to continue sitting with those uncomfortable feelings. and that can reveal hidden strengths. It can clarify your values. It can deepen your empathy for yourself and for others. And so if we embrace the experiences of life that are, to put it simply, a knock on our self-esteem, on our, what we believe that sometimes we are, it's just part of the human condition. And you can cultivate a sense of purpose and meaning that transcends temporary setbacks. Because there's this beautiful saying that says, "This too shall pass." So I think I'm very passionate about this subject because, I remember that when I was 17 and I ran away, my choices were so limited. It was either alcohol, drugs, prostitution, ending up in prison, or killing myself. Those were the 5 choices I saw that were available to me. Instead, I ran away to a monastery in India. And so there is always another possibility. There's always something else available to us. But it's not going to fly through our window. It's not going to present itself, and come with me and do, you have to take risks. I mean, traveling to the other side of the world at my age, with a suitcase and a plastic bag, I still don't know how I did that.
Yeah, it's remarkable because back then it wasn't just like, oh, let's go on a gap year. I didn't want to date. I didn't want to put a timestamp on it, JC, but you have 1978. I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Wasn't really. It was very unusual.
Yes. So, so what can I say about, learning to deal with rejection and failure? I don't think it's ever easy for any of us. I don't want to trivialize, do this, do that, do the other. No, it's bloody difficult, but it's an essential part of our personal growth and mental well-being. You have to acknowledge your emotions, you have to reframe the narrative, and you have to prioritize self-care. And then I believe you can transform those challenges into opportunities for resilience and self-discovery. I mean, I think we all need to remember that rejection and failure do not define you. You can allow it to do that, but you can also allow it not to do so. They're just, for me, chapters in my story. They're just things that happen. And so time, patience, and compassion. I know that you can emerge from these experiences stronger, wiser, and more empowered than ever before. And this is what we teach here at the retreat to people every single day.
JC, can I just ask you, I was doing a bit of research and this thing came up about rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Is that something that you have sort of come across? Is that like, is this like rejection on steroids? Is this like a hyper?
Be careful, Amy, because first of all, it's a condition that is characterized by extreme sensitivity to rejection and criticism.
Right.
Okay. So individuals that have RSD, they experience intense emotional pain and distress in response to perceived or actual rejection, even from minor events. Now, I think that it's not yet fully understood where RSD, the exact cause of it. But it is very often associated with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Okay, so it's almost like a neurological
absolutely
condition at that point.
Yes. And so it could come to also through early childhood experiences of rejection or trauma, genetic predisposition, or neurochemical imbalances. And it's characterized by intense feelings of sadness, shame, guilt. And again, we must remember that shame, if we put it in a petri dish, and we in order for it to grow exponentially, it needs silence, secrecy, and judgment.
Yes.
However, if we put shame in a petri dish and we douse it with empathy and compassion, it can't survive.
Right.
So that's one. And then the other symptoms are overreacting to criticism or perceived rejection, difficulty in regulating emotions, low self-esteem, avoidance of social situations, fear of failure, and learning, which they learn in very early in childhood, people-pleasing behaviors, because they are taught, that in order to avoid losing the attachment, that they have to please the adults.
Like a conditional love kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
So, yeah. I mean, it's not yet a recognized mental health disorder, but it is very well known within the context of ADHD. And so what can help is, just so if people listen and recognize this, it's treatment for RSD is usually therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy works very well. To learn to develop coping mechanisms and learning to manage their emotions and reducing their sensitivity to rejection. A second alternative is medication, obviously, tricyclic antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications, in order to manage the symptoms if they're very severe. And then, of course, there are support groups, that where people fall with ADHD and that understand RSD, and they could provide, support and validation.
Yeah. I guess we do talk a lot about I guess the growth of the internet on this podcast, but with these things where, I'm not saying that is a niche condition, but you just get online, you can connect immediately. Maybe different parents whose children have got that. What an amazing resource that just was not there 20 years ago. It's incredible, really, isn't it? That you would have had to write to somebody or write to an organization. You would have felt completely alone if your child had that. How awful.
There's a lot of possibilities nowadays for people to find help.
You'd think that we'd all be less fucked up than we were, wouldn't you?
Well, I can't say anything to that, can I?
No, I mean, no, yeah. I think that everybody was always messed up. We just, maybe we just sort of...
There's just a lot more help available nowadays.
Yeah.
There's a lot more help, but there's also a lot more pressure, isn't there, to be a high achiever?
Yeah.
In all
maybe
areas.
The pressure back then was to just get through the food rations or for a bomb not to drop on your head, and now...
Well, I think that comes with, as we are not being threatened in our basic instinct for survival. And I think the only time that happened was with COVID, where the mere fact of breathing could kill you. We hope that today's episode has been useful in reframing rejection and serving as a reminder that we are not alone in our failures.
If you enjoy the Place Retreats podcast, please take a moment to give it a rating and recommend it to friends and family. It really does make a difference.
You can email us and follow all of us on Instagram, and the details for all of that are in the show notes.